Welcome back to the Unknown Archives. I'm Flynn, and tonight we're calmly revisiting some of the dumbest moments in history that are actually true. This is part of a new series, so let us know if you like it. First up, a pope tries to outmaneuver a pirate. Then, another pope puts a corpse on trial. And finally, a pig faces the courtroom, lawyers and all. So settle in, no need to make anything up. The past was already doing just fine on its own. Part 1. A Pope, a Pirate, and a Bad Plan. In the spring of 1503, the Mediterranean smells of salt, tar, and financial opportunity. The Republic of Venice and the Papal States are squabbling like rival hedge funds, and the sea lanes have become linked in for criminals. Anyone with a fast hull and a loose moral code is networking. Enter Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, 40-something, silver-tongued, and so politically connected he can barely move his arms. He's sailing from Rome to Savona on what's meant to be a discreet fundraising tour. Discreet, that is, until Caira Dean Barbarossa spots his ship and thinks, that man looks like collateral. Pirate raids are usually chaos. Barbarossa's crew treats it like an onboarding session. Within minutes, the Cardinal is seated on a crate, handed watered wine, and presented with a ransom schedule that reads like the Renaissance version of a PayPal link. Though, Barbarossa notes apologetically, we only accept gold florins or reputable banking families. Giuliano arches a brow. 100,000? Don't be absurd. Negotiation begins. In 1503 this is no scandal. Kidnapping a cleric is Tuesday. As one historian later writes, piracy was less a crime and more a freelance business model. Act 2. Negotiations with God's middleman. Technically, Cardinal della Rovere is a hostage. Practically, he's redecorating. By day 3, he's moved into the captain's quarters and transformed it into a pop-up Vatican Airbnb. He demands candlelight for Vespers, critiques the cook's saffron usage, and starts a running chess tournament with the quartermaster. The ransom talks become a flea market haggle. Barbarossa, 80,000 final offer. Cardinal, 30, and I'll throw in plenary indulgences for the first 5 men who learn Latin. Barbarossa, 60. Also, what is a plenary indulgence? They settle at 40,000 florins, a discount Giuliano finances by borrowing from Genoese bankers he absolutely cannot afford to annoy. But the optics? Impeccable. He's displayed fiscal restraint and personal grit. Rome whispers, perhaps he should run the whole show. Meanwhile, the pirates are oddly charmed. Rumours swirl of the Cardinal blessing a pet monkey, mediating a dispute over stolen cheese, and delivering a 5-minute sermon on the virtue of hydration. One sailor later says, Stockholm Syndrome? No. This was more like when a Michelin chef crashes your backyard barbecue. By the time Giuliano steps off the gangplank at Ostia, he and Barbarossa clasp forearms like old classmates. Rome gasps. Venice pretends not to notice. Fast forward to 1506. Giuliano della Rovere has upgraded his job title to Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, the man who will commission Michelangelo's ceiling because the chapel needs better content. His to-do list now includes crushing Venice, outwitting France, and, oddly specific, solve piracy, maybe. Naval power is expensive, so Julius rereads his contact list and thinks of a certain bearded entrepreneur with proven maritime skills. Envoys sail south with polite letters. Dear Barbarossa, would you like a steady paycheck, papal flags, and permission to harass Venice on our behalf? Barbarossa, who has always wanted dental insurance, says yes. Several of his former shipmates, possibly including Sinan Reis, logistics genius and part-time smuggler, take up identical offers. Overnight, yesterday's outlaws become official Christian corsairs, a title about as contradictory as ethical hacker, but far more lucrative. Historians scrawl footnotes in disbelief. 1503, Cardinal bargains down his own ransom. 1506, same man hires the kidnappers. 1513, Pope dies, remembered for armies, art, and the fine print, funded pirates during lunch breaks. As one modern commentator put it, this is like if Liam Neeson survived Taken, then put the kidnappers on retainer for airport security. Or, for the younger crowd, imagine negotiating your release from a ransomware attack, then inviting the hackers to run IT. You'd think the strangest thing a pope could do was negotiate with pirates, but no, one pope decided to put a corpse on trial, his predecessor, because apparently holding a grudge wasn't limited to the living. The Pope who put a corpse on trial. A bedtime history for people who've already given up on normal. Act 1. Formosus, Stephen, and the Grudge Beyond the Grave. It was the year 897, and Pope Stephen VI had a problem. Several problems, actually, but chief among them, a corpse. To be specific, the corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, who, despite having been dead and buried for over 7 months, was still making trouble. Now, you might assume that once you've been Pope and then not alive, your days of causing papal headaches are over. You'd be wrong. This was the Catholic Church in the late 9th century, when excommunication, assassination, and light necromancy were all considered valid administrative tools. The Vatican had not yet developed what one might call HR protocols. Formosus, in life, had been complicated. He was born in what is now Bulgaria, rose to become Bishop of Porto, got excommunicated for reasons that mostly involved annoying the wrong aristocrats, and then, somehow, got reinstated and elected Pope, a comeback worthy of a Netflix docu-series. He spent most of his papacy juggling warring factions, rival kings, and the constant threat of being stabbed at lunch. Standard 9th century papal vibes. He wasn't universally loved, but that was never the job description. Unfortunately for Stephen VI, a man who'd been nudged into power by the very people Formosus had tried to keep at bay, the dead Pope was still casting a shadow. Loyalties lingered, so did rival claims to legitimacy, and worst of all, paperwork. Stephen was not a man of nuance. He didn't want to debate Formosus's memory. He wanted Formosus himself condemned, which, under normal circumstances, would be difficult, on account of the whole already buried thing. But Stephen had a solution, a plan so bold, so theologically shaky, it would become legend. He would dig up the body, dress it in papal robes, prop it on a throne, and put the corpse of Pope Formosus on trial. Because, apparently, in 897, you could do that, and people would attend. Act 2. The Trial of the Dead. Your Honour, the defendant is decaying. And so, in what may be history's boldest example of digging up old grudges, Pope Stephen VI ordered the literal exhumation of Formosus's corpse. This was not done quietly, nor discreetly. The body was unearthed in broad daylight, no pretense, no whisper of ceremony, and dressed in full papal vestments, as if the man had merely overslept Mass by 7 months. Then he was carried, rather unceremoniously, to the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the official seat of the Pope. Not for reburial, for a public trial. Formosus, long dead, long buried, was placed on an actual throne in a courtroom inside a church, while Pope Stephen, alive and very much overthinking things, prepared to prosecute him. The corpse was slumped but regal, like a department store mannequin that had fought in a war. Some accounts say attendants tied him upright with rope. Others describe a more theatrical approach: carefully posed hands, tilted mitre, and just enough rouge to make the body look papal-ish. It was the Weekend at Bernie's reboot, but written by a vengeful Vatican lawyer, and because even the undead have legal rights, a young deacon was assigned to serve as Formosis's defence attorney. It was not a high-demand role. He was likely chosen for his availability and inability to say no. The deacon, to his credit, tried. He addressed the court. He gestured respectfully to the defendant. He may have even asked for a recess, though it's unclear whether that was for legal strategy or to emotionally process the situation. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear this was never about justice. This was pageantry, the 9th century version of a courtroom drama, except the star witness was held together with string. Formosus was charged with perjury, violating canon law, usurping the papacy, and, more vaguely, being where he shouldn't have been, when he shouldn't have been there. Notably, being dead was not one of the charges. Witnesses were called, scrolls were read aloud, the crowd sat through it all, bishops, monks, and deeply confused Roman citizens, as arguments were made against a corpse. And through it all, Formosus remained still, silent, and, by all contemporary accounts, the calmest man in the room. Act 3. The sentence. Unsurprisingly, the verdict was guilty. Formosus, despite being 7 months past his last heartbeat, was declared retroactively unfit to have ever been pope. His election, invalid. His papal decrees, wiped clean. His legacy, flushed down the theological drain. And just to ensure the symbolism really landed, Stephen ordered the corpse's blessing fingers, the ones used to perform sacraments, to be cut off. Because if you're going to put a corpse on trial, you might as well be petty about it. Then came the full theatrical finale. The papal robes were torn from the body. He was dragged through the streets of Rome, a grim parade, with no music, no dignity, and very confused bystanders. And finally, because every tragedy needs a punchline, he was tossed, unceremoniously, into the Tiber River. One might be tempted to ask, had Stephen made his point? No, but the river mercifully did. Later, a group of sympathetic monks, possibly with better taste or just better PR instincts, retrieved the body from the water and reburied it in secret. A gesture of dignity, or at the very least, damage control. And then, poetic justice arrived. Pope Stephen VI, architect of this ghastly circus, was deposed within the year. Outraged nobles led the charge. He was imprisoned and, depending on which account you believe, either died mysteriously in custody or was strangled by someone with very strong theological objections. The entire affair was retroactively dubbed the Cadaver Synod, because apparently Weekend at Bernie's, canon law edition, didn't test well with the bishops. Stephen's successor annulled the trial. Formosus was reburied, again with full honours, and the church quietly agreed to never hold that particular kind of court case again, publicly, at least. Now, if putting a dead pope on trial feels like the legal system hitting rock bottom, just wait, because in parts of medieval Europe the courts looked at pigs, rats and locusts and said, "You too have rights and responsibilities." The time animals were put on trial. Act 1. All rise for the defendant, the pig. In medieval Europe, you could be tried for a crime, even if you weren't human. Between the 13th and 17th centuries, European courts conducted a surprising number of trials involving animals. And these weren't informal affairs or village gossip spun out of control. No, these were official legal proceedings, complete with judges, prosecutors, witnesses, written verdicts, and in some cases, defense attorneys. Yes, actual human lawyers defending animals. It was the medieval equivalent of Law and Order Livestock Unit. Pigs, cows, horses, goats, dogs, chickens, and occasionally, for reasons no historian has adequately explained, insects. You might assume this was symbolic, a bit of religious theatre perhaps, or an attempt to teach a moral lesson, but no, these weren't metaphors, they weren't jokes, they were law. There were two main systems at work. The church handled smaller creatures, rats, locusts, caterpillars, creatures accused of plagues, infestations, or general crop-based rudeness. In such cases, clergy would issue formal warnings. If that failed, they would proceed to excommunication, curses, and the occasional trial by scripture. Larger animals, typically livestock, fell under secular courts, the same system that tried humans. These cases were treated with complete sincerity. The accused could be summoned, detained, interrogated, and in some cases, punished by death. And yes, the punishment was carried out publicly, as both spectacle and social reinforcement. The court records are clear. These trials happened across France, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, dozens upon dozens of them. Most of the animals were pigs, some were cows, a few were geese. In one memorable case, a rooster was convicted of witchcraft for laying an egg. And while modern readers may raise an eyebrow, the courts of the time raised none, nor did they ask why a rooster was laying eggs. These trials were conducted in full seriousness because, to medieval logic, moral order required legal order, even if the defendant had hooves. The idea was simple, if slightly unhinged. If an animal committed a crime, it must be judged. If it was dangerous, it must be punished. And if God's law was to be upheld, someone had to take the stand, even if they couldn't speak, even if they were a pig.
Act 2. The Pig Trials. Guilty as charged, oink. Of all the animals dragged before medieval courts, none appeared more frequently or more grimly than the pig. In the towns and villages of Europe, pigs weren't just livestock, they were urban hazards. They roamed freely through streets, alleys, marketplaces. They snatched food, knocked over carts, trampled feet, and, on more than one occasion, attacked a child. And when that happened, when a pig killed someone, the response was swift. The pig was arrested, not slaughtered, not dragged to the edge of town, arrested, placed in a holding cell, assigned legal counsel, and brought before a court of law to stand trial for murder. One of the most infamous cases occurred in 1386 in the French town of Falaise. A sow was accused of attacking and killing an infant. She was imprisoned. She was tried publicly, and, because no detail was beneath ceremony, she was dressed in a waistcoat and trousers. It's not clear who tailored the outfit, or why pants were deemed legally necessary, but someone, somewhere, looked at a dead baby and said, "Yes, but what if we gave the pig a little jacket?" The trial proceeded with full seriousness. The judge heard witness testimony, the prosecution made its case, and the pig's lawyer, yes, there was one, argued for leniency. No word on whether he billed by the hour or by the bucket of slop. The verdict was guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. And because justice must not only be done but be seen to be done, the execution was conducted publicly. The hound gathered to watch. No word survives on whether the pig was allowed a final meal. Some accounts suggest pigs were flogged before execution, as if a stern whipping might deter future barnyard crime sprees. Others were excommunicated. A few were denied Christian burial and dumped in unconsecrated ground. The law, it seems, bent over backward to treat these animals exactly like people, with all the rites, rituals, and punishments you'd expect from a medieval court. Right down
to the rope. To the people of the time, this wasn't absurd. It was justice, restoring order, reminding the world that crime, even when committed on four legs, would not go unanswered. It was courtroom drama, crossed with a petting zoo, directed by someone who had read too much Leviticus and not enough biology. Act 3. Vermin and the long arm of the law. Summons for the weevils. It wasn't just livestock that faced the gavel. Sometimes the accused was smaller, much smaller. Across medieval Europe, trials were held for rats, mice, weevils, caterpillars, and locusts, tiny invaders blamed for crop failures, food shortages, and spiritual decline. In these cases, it was usually the church that took action. The logic? These weren't just pests, they were violators of divine order, saboteurs of God's agricultural design. And so, legal proceedings began. First came the formal summons. Yes, really. Courts issued written notices, addressed to vermin. They were nailed to church doors or read aloud in the fields, instructing the creatures to appear in court on a set date, sometimes in the morning, smiling, because everyone knows weevils are not evening people. One record notes with complete sincerity, the defendants failed to appear in court, and adds, the prosecution was not surprised. When the pests failed to attend, being pests, courts often proceeded in absentia. Some escalated to excommunication. A few added public curses. One bishop even tried smearing holy oil around the fields. Results were inconclusive. In 16th century France, a group of weevils was tried for destroying vineyards. The court appointed them a lawyer who argued, quite reasonably given the assignment, that weevils were God's creatures too, and thus had equal claim to the vines. The court actually considered this. Then, with classic medieval compromise, ruled that the weevils had 6 days to leave the region. The weevils declined. Elsewhere, a bishop attempted to spiritually banish a swarm of locusts from his diocese. The rite was performed, candles were lit, Latin was spoken. The locusts did not comply, though one imagines they appreciated the ambiance. In 1480, a trial against rats was postponed after the rats' lawyer successfully argued that the roads were unsafe due to cats. The judge accepted this and rescheduled. Let that sink in. A court delayed proceedings because the rats had credible security concerns. None of this was parody. This was how people made sense of the world, through faith, through ritual, and through paperwork. Final act, just as complicated. A brief note on sanity. Not every hooved defendant met the gallows. In 1457, a sow in Savigny was convicted of killing a child, but her 6 piglets acquitted, the court noting quite seriously that they had not participated knowingly. Medieval justice, it seems, made room for nuance, at least for baby pigs. Elsewhere, in Burgundy, a sow was spared while the farmer was fined for negligence, and in 1499, a cow charged with vandalizing a vineyard bolted before trial. The bailiff searched barns, fields, and, according to the record, certain wooded places, but never found her. The case was eventually marked postponed sine die, Latin for we give up. The court was defeated. The cow was free. And somehow that may have been the most reasonable verdict of the century, because across 3 very real chapters of European history we've seen a pirate kidnap a pope put a corpse on trial, and a courtroom full of monks try to evict a family of weevils, using legal representation. These weren't footnotes, they were features. Centuries of law, paperwork, and papal politics, all held together by the sincere belief that justice must be served, even if the defendant was missing, decomposing, or covered in feathers. Most legal systems require 3 things: a judge, a lawyer, and someone who can speak. Medieval Europe usually managed 2 out of 3, and for hundreds of years,
that was considered good enough.
So sleep well, and if life ever gets strange, take comfort. At least you're not arguing habeas corpus on behalf of a pig.